So today we're looking at our part number RF340-4PR-ASL. This is a fairly new product for us, but it's really the evolution of several other products that we've been manufacturing for the last 15 or 20 years. We've taken a lot of features from several different controls that we had and taken feedback from a lot of our customers and combined them to create one control that's very versatile, very powerful. It's a really, really nice system. This control has a 12-volt DC input on it, and it provides 4 polarity reversing DC outputs. So a polarity reversing output will allow you to control the direction of a DC motor. We'll go through a few of the connections on here. There are 2 large screw posts for the input power. They're labeled ground and positive 12 volts. And then you have your 4 motor outputs. So each motor output is labeled M1, M2, M3, and M4. And each one has 2 terminals that you would run your wires from your motor to. The M1, M2, M3, and M4 are controlled on the remote control 1, 2, 3, and 4. Over here we have a light output. So there's a light button on the remote control. If you were to hit that, it would supply a 12-volt output to power a 12-volt light. And then on the bottom, you have manual switch connections. Now these are really handy to have for a system like this, because if you lose your remote control, if the battery for your remote control dies, or if you just want to set up a switch panel so you can control the motors that you have manually without needing the remote control, it's a really nice setup to have, and we'll go through how that works a little later in the video. The other connections on this control, there's a white connector right here. That's for connecting a long-range antenna. So this control ships with an internal antenna on it, and that internal antenna typically works up to about 100 feet. If you use the long-range antenna, your range extends up to 500 feet. Now, you may not need 500 feet of operation, but you may want to mount this inside of a metal box. You may be putting it next to a motor that has a lot of noise that interferes with an RF signal. And if that's the case, you can use the long-range antenna. You can plug it into this connector and then run it out to a position that is more conducive to receiving an RF signal. The long-range antenna is really nice because it's totally waterproof. You can mount it outside and then run that connector inside into a more protected environment. Other connections on here, there's a program switch and an LED next to it. We'll show you later in the video that LED is an indicator for several different features that we have, and it's also used during the programming process. Then you also have these 5 rotary dip switches on the side here. Now the top 4 rotary switches are for current sensing. Each motor output has an individual current sensing circuit built into the control. So that current sensing circuit is going to constantly monitor how much current is required to run the motor that you have. So if your motor is only rated for 20 amps, you can actually use this rotary switch and set it for a maximum current of 20 amps. And if the control sees 20 amps on that motor line, it'll shut it down and stop operating so you don't damage your motor. So it's a really nice feature for protecting your product. Also, we ship it with the dip switches in the position for a 30 amp cutoff. So our control, the relays on our control are rated for 30 amps. So if you exceed 30 amps, not only is it going to protect your system, it's going to protect the remote control system also. The bottom rotary switch is actually used for a timeout. Now, the control can operate in one of 2 ways. You can operate it without a timeout, and to do that, you actually set this rotary switch to 0. The other positions on the rotary switch adjust the amount of time for the timeout. And what the timeout is on your remote control, there's basically an unlock function. So there's an A and a B button. You hit A and then you hit B, and it unlocks and turns on the remote control system. And that remote control system is going to stay on until it doesn't see any operation from the remote control transmitter for whatever amount of time you have that timeout set for. Once it's reached that time, the control is going to shut down until you hit A and then B again. Now the point behind that is if you have an application where you don't want unintended operation of your remote control system, like if you have the remote control in your pocket and there's a safety concern if you were to push one of the buttons, it prevents you from being able to do that. So if I have my timeout built in, I put that remote control in my pocket and my system's not activated, I can hit buttons on it all day long and nothing is going to activate. So it's a really nice built-in safety feature. Highly would recommend using it unless you don't have any safety concerns on your outputs, and then using the no timeout feature would be fine. The last item on the control is this 4-position dip switch in the bottom. There are 4 positions on it. They control the 4 motor outputs. Each one can set a motor output for either momentary or latching operation. Now, momentary operation would be I push a button on the remote control and the system stays on as long as I'm holding that button down. Latching operation, I would hit the button and release it and it would turn the system on, and to turn it off I would have to push and release the button again. So each one of those can be independently set up for momentary or latching operation. Go through a couple of the available accessories that we have for the system. As I said, we ship the system with a receiver and a remote control. This is the standard remote control that we sell. This remote control functions on an A23 12-volt battery, and it's going to give you about 45 minutes of actual transmitting time on a single battery. So that would be the amount of time I'm holding a button down and actually sending a signal. That's how long the battery is going to last, about 45 minutes. Once you had 45 minutes is up, you're going to have to open that enclosure up, put a new battery in, and then you're going to have another 45 minutes of operation. We just came out with a new product that's really handy in this type of application, and that's our rechargeable transmitter. So works just the same as the other one, except it has a rechargeable battery inside of it, and also instead of running for 45 minutes like that control does, on a single charge this one is going to run for 9 hours, so substantially more powerful battery built into it. Once the battery does die on it, we have a micro USB connector on the bottom. We'll give you a micro USB cable. You just plug that into the bottom, plug the other end into a wall charger or a computer or an automotive charger, power it back up. You've got another 9 hours worth of operation, and you're ready to go. We talked about our long-range antenna. Again, you plug that into the connector, remove your jumper, and you can increase your range from 100 feet to 500 feet. Last accessory that we have available is a waterproof enclosure. So if you were to purchase this control with the waterproof enclosure, this is what it looks like. We actually would mount the board inside the waterproof enclosure and pot it in there instead of the tray like you see there. This is a really nice box. It's actually rated for IP68, so it can handle any outdoor conditions. We ship it with 4 watertight cable glands on it, and there's room to put more on there if you want to. So 4 is typically adequate for most people's applications, but sometimes you're using heavier wire or you've got a lot of wires running in for your manual switches and you want to add some more cable glands in. So this whole space in here, you can add more in if you need to. It's got a nice rubber gasket on the lid, and it actually snaps closed and has a couple of mounting wings, so you can mount it to the outside of a building, outside of a vehicle. You can mount it on a post outside. It doesn't really matter, but really, really nice option if you're going to be using it outdoors. I'd highly recommend using that. Okay, we can go through some of the operating. So the first thing we're going to do is connect our power. Again, we've got the 2 bolts on there with a nut, very easy to hook up. Just make sure we're connecting ground to ground, and 12 volts to our positive 12 volts. And And they're all labeled on the sides. We've got small labels. It's probably difficult to see in the video, but there's small labels that run along the sides, show you what all of the connections are. So we'll connect our ground terminal and put our nut back on. You want to make sure you tighten these down pretty good, especially if you're going to use it in an automotive application, because they can vibrate off. So when I connect my positive lead, actually that little LED next to the program switch is going to come on just for a second, and that's just telling me that you got power connected. Just a nice little indicator to know that I'm doing everything right. So okay, now that we have power connected, we're going to connect our motors. So in this setup, we're using a little 12-volt power source, little battery, and we're using a couple of small motors just for demonstration purposes. Typically you're using a car battery or a motorcycle battery and some big motors, but you know, for this application, or for just for showing it, this works well. But again, each one of these outputs is actually rated to handle 30 amps at 12 volts, so it's kind of overkill for what we're doing, but great way to show it. Okay, so our first motor is going to be this bigger one. We're going to connect it to the M1 and M2 terminals. There's just a couple of screw terminals on the block. Again, there's 2 terminals for each motor. I just have my wires stripped back, so that works fine. A lot of people like to use a ring terminal or a fork terminal. That's fine too, but just stripping your wires back, that'll work. You know, if you just want to do it that way. Sometimes a little bit easier, but if you have the ability to do it connecting and disconnecting using a terminal is a little bit easier. Okay, we're going to connect this second smaller motor just so we can show some of the other features. This motor is a little bit slower and a little bit smaller, but we'll be able to show off what we need to in the demonstration. Again, we're just hooking 2 up. You can hook up to 4 up to it. You can only use 1 if you want to. Again, this is meant for kind of versatile operation, so you don't have to use 4, but you can. Alright, so now that we have that connected, I have my timeout actually set up on no timeout right now. So we'll go through that in a minute, how to set it up with timeout, but just for starters, we're going to start with no timeout. So now that we've got our motors hooked up, what we want to do is program the remote control. So we're going to use our standard remote control for that. To do this, we're going to hold down the program button, and that LED is going to light up next to it. Once it lights up, it's in program mode. And all I have to do is hit a button on my transmitter, and it's going to blink 1 time, and then we'll wait until the light goes out. It just takes a second. So now it's out. We don't have our timeout on, so now where I have my motor hooked up to motor 1, you'll see that it turns. And I have this set up in momentary mode right now. If I hit my down button on my number 1 output, it turns the opposite direction. Same thing on my other motor. As you can see, it's a little bit slower and not as powerful, but it turns as well. Pop the little flag back on here, and just easier to see it turn. That's on. Okay. We also have, so in addition to being able to turn one motor or turn the other motor, we have a nice option where we can turn them both at the same time. So you can see they're both going now, and you can go the other direction. Okay, so that's in momentary mode. Again, we can set it up for either momentary or latching operation. So since the motor 1's a little bit easier to see, we'll take our dip switch, and currently it is in the off position, so we're going to take number 1 and turn it on, and that just changed the operation on number 1 from momentary to latching. So now that number 1's in latching mode, I hit the button and it turns until I hit the button again, and then it stops. Other direction, same thing. Okay, now that that's connected, we can kind of show you how we use our long-range antenna. So if I wanted to use my long-range antenna, first thing I'm usually going to do is pull out this jumper wire. You're probably going to need a pair of needle nose or just a pair of pliers to pull it off. It's on there pretty tight. So it's off, and you'll be able to see 2 pins exposed when that happens. So you can see now that that's off, my motor doesn't work. So I'm going to plug my antenna back in, or my antenna in, and try and operate it, and there you go. Again, in latching mode. It's now functioning on the long-range antenna. If I decide I don't want the long-range antenna anymore, I can pull it out, put my jumper cap back on, hope I didn't have it upside down. Okay, and now, again, we're functioning in latching mode. Now you'll see there, actually it's a good feature to point out. In fact, I'll put it back in momentary mode and see if we can show this a little bit better. If I go to reverse the motor, if I'm instantly hitting it one direction then trying to switch it, there's going to be about a half-second delay. Now the reason we do that is you don't want to turn your motor, stop it and instantly turn it the other direction. You're going to end up damaging your motor if you keep doing that. So we have a built-in half-second delay between operations, just so you're not slamming the motor one way and then the other way and causing any damage. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is show the manual switches. So for that, I just pulled one of the toggle switches that we sell on our website. This is actually a nice switch for doing what we're trying to do. It's our part number 28-3P-MOM. It's simply an on-off-on momentary toggle switch. So, it's center off position and then on and springs back to off. Okay, so the center terminal on this switch is common. So on my manual switches, I have two common positions. The reason there's two is if you're connecting all of these up, it's hard to get a bunch of commons all on one terminal. So we have two common terminals. So I'm going to connect to the common terminal with the common terminal on my switch. And then, because we're going to operate motor 1, I have M1 up and M1 down. So we'll connect the switch to those positions. Again, I just have my wires stripped back here using a terminal on this one. Again, pretty easy option for you if you have it. Otherwise, stripped wires work fine. Alright, so we're all connected on our manual switch, and now you can see with that switch I can perform the remote control operations. Alright. One remote control with a single receiver. So this receiver can actually accept up to 99 remote controls, which is a really nice feature. A remote control can actually be programmed to as many receivers as you want, but this will store 99 remote controls. So I've got a second remote right here. When we put it into program mode, just so you know, it erases all previous remote controls that have been programmed to the system. So as soon as I hit this program button, even though this one's programmed right now, it's going to forget it. So I've got to reprogram it. So anyway, we're going to go into program mode. I'll hold the program button down and that LED is going to come on. I hit a button on my first remote, it blinks once. I hit a button on my second remote, it blinks twice. We wait for it to go out. And now you can see this remote control controls my motor, and this remote control controls my motor. One other thing we'll show here real quick is how to change the battery out on one of these transmitters. Again, with the rechargeable transmitter, you're just going to plug a USB connector into it, plug it into the wall, charge it up, you're good to go. So to change the battery on one of these guys, there are two screws on the back. Pull those two screws out. It should come out real easy for you. And we're just going to remove the back of the unit, and should have good access to the battery. So, got to make sure to take them all the way out. And you can open this and close it many times. We've got actually screw inserts built into the plastic, so you don't have to worry about damaging them. Just when you're closing it back up, don't crank down on it too hard. Once they're tight, you're okay to go. So that's what it's going to look like when it's opened up. This is a rubber gasket. It actually acts as the keypad, and it seals the enclosure up when everything's closed up. So we'll take that keypad off carefully, because you can end up pulling this board off. It's not the end of the world if you do that, but it is staked down right now, and it's a little bit easier to work with if it stays staked down. If not, the rubber keypad and the lid of the enclosure are going to hold it into place, but it makes reassembly a little bit trickier. So just be careful when you're taking that off. Okay, so take the old battery out. Make sure you throw this away. Do not put it back in the drawer. Your wife will get upset with you. And we will put the new battery in. We'll put our rubber cover back on. When you're putting this on, there's a couple of lips, one on the top and one on the bottom, where the screws go through. Just make sure you're clear of those before you close it up. If it gets caught on there, you're going to have all sorts of trouble getting it back together. So if that's on there, we can put the cover back on. It kind of slides right into place. Buttons go in. Put our two screws back on. And we are good to go. Now, once you disconnect power from your receiver or you change your battery, you do not need to reprogram. The receiver has non-volatile memory, and the transmitter always sends the same code. So changing the battery doesn't mean you have to reprogram it, and if you lose power to your receiver, you don't need to reprogram it. It has non-volatile memory. It does not forget. Alright, the last thing we're going to take a look at is the timeout feature. So we've shown you how to operate it without the timeout built into it. We're going to use the timeout so we can show you that process. So again, I have it set on 0. 0 is our no timeout setting. All of the other functions have a time that's built into them. So we're going to turn it to number 1, which is actually a 1-minute timeout. So what that's saying is once I turn the system on, it's going to stay on and allow me to activate all of my motors until it doesn't see me activating my motors for 1 minute. When that happens, the system turns off and I have to reactivate it. So we'll take one of our remote controls, which is already programmed, and if you see now, my motor doesn't operate when I'm hitting the functions on it. What I need to do is hit the A button and then the B button. And you'll see when I did that, the LED next to the program switch turned on. That means that my system is active. And so now that that's happened, my motor turns again. Now, the one feature that will always work, even if you have the timeout on, is the light switch. So the light always gives you 12 volts no matter what. If you have the timeout set at 10 minutes, if you hit the light, it's going to work even if the system is not activated. So what that's intended for, a lot of times these are used on RVs and campers, and there's an exterior light that they want to power no matter what. They can turn that on. You can see what you're doing if it's dark outside. Otherwise, there's a couple of troubleshooting items to point out. So we do get calls frequently. People talk about their transmitters operating intermittently. Okay, if your transmitter is operating intermittently, 99.9% of the time it's because you need to change the battery. Just pop it open, put a new battery in, and you're good to go. We ship the control with a spare battery. You also can buy a pack of batteries on our website if you want to. When you place your order initially, you got a stash of them, you're good to go. Otherwise, you can buy an A23 12-volt battery at just about any hardware store. They're pretty readily available. If, for some reason, changing the battery doesn't take care of it, one of the other things we occasionally hear is they're getting that flickering or no transmission, or having problems programming the control. What can happen there is if you are trying to transmit right on top of the receiver, you could be overpowering the system with too much RF frequency. So the RF that we have built into our transmitters is very powerful. If you're right on top of the system, you could totally overwhelm it with the signal. Now, most of the time it's going to work still, but sometimes they're just too powerful, they overwhelm the system. If that's the case, you really should be about 3 to 5 feet away whenever you're operating the transmitter, and then you know that you're going to get good transmission to the receiver. So if you're programming, it doesn't seem like it's taking the program, you've changed the battery out, what you want to do is just keep the transmitter about an arm's length away when you're trying to program it or when you're trying to operate it. It should take care of the problem for you. Otherwise, we test everything that we send out 100% under load before it goes out. We test all of the features on the system. So when you're getting a product, it has been totally functionally tested right before it goes into the box and should be ready to operate.